It was supposed to be a peaceful New Year's dinner, the kind where you make resolutions and look forward to a fresh start. But that night, something was off. I could feel it in the air. A heavy, unspoken tension lingered between us. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Karen had been distant for days. The kind of distant where you can't quite place it, but you know something's wrong. Her eyes had that vacant look, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes, it was forced. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I watched her as she brought the soup to the table, the steam rising in the dim kitchen light. For a moment, she seemed like the woman I'd been married to for 20 years, but something had changed. I didn't know exactly what, but I had the sinking feeling that I wasn't the only one sitting at that table anymore. I reached for my spoon, and as I dipped it into the warm broth, a strange bitterness hit my tongue. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But no, there it was again, sharp and metallic. Poison. It took a second for my mind to process what was happening. Then instinct kicked in. Years of military training had turned my reactions into reflexes. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask questions. I swapped our plates. It was done so quickly, so smoothly. She never noticed. I barely noticed myself, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Every muscle in my body was on edge. I watched her take a spoonful, and for a brief moment, I saw her relax. She had no idea that in that split second, her life had changed. And so had mine. This wasn't just about the soup. It wasn't even about the poison. It was the fact that Karen, the woman I had loved, the woman who had been my partner in life for over 20 years, had planned to kill me. She had planned to end my life. And for what? Money? Power? I swallowed the last of the soup in my bowl, trying to push down the rising bile in my throat. I couldn't focus. All I could think about was the life insurance policy. It was the first thing that flashed through my mind. I hadn't seen the papers for years, but I knew it existed. The policy she had never told me about, the one that would pay out millions if I died. That thought consumed me, as the minutes stretched into an eternity. The weight of what she had done hit me like a freight train. But it wasn't the betrayal that hurt the most. It was the realization that Karen had planned it all. The woman who had once held my hand, who had smiled at me across the dinner table, was capable of something so cold, so calculated. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her. But that wasn't the plan. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed something more than a gut feeling. I pushed away from the table and stood up, pretending to be fine. But inside, everything had shattered. I could hear the sound of my breath as I fought to steady myself, to stay calm. I knew that if I let my emotions take over, I'd lose everything. I had to think like a soldier. This was no longer about love or betrayal, it was about survival. And survival meant gathering evidence. I waited until Karen went to bed. Then I went to her office, her private space where she kept everything hidden from me. The financial records, the accounts, the life insurance policy. She thought I wouldn't notice the little things, the strange withdrawals, the untraceable transactions. But I did. I found it all. I sat at her desk, poring over the documents, my hands shaking with a mix of disbelief and fury. The life insurance policy was right there, tucked between old receipts and unopened letters. And the payout? It was enough to make her a very wealthy woman. All she had to do was get rid of me. I kept flipping through the pages, my eyes burning with the truth. She had been plotting this for months. The poison in the soup was no accident. It was part of a plan I was about to dismantle. Piece by piece. My stomach twisted, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the rage that simmered beneath the surface. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a betrayal of my life. My life was a commodity to her. She didn't care about me. She cared about the money. I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't let her win. I walked out of the room, my mind already racing ahead to the next step. This wasn't just going to be about exposing her. No, I wasn't going to play it that way. I would make her pay, but in a way she'd never see coming. I wasn't just going to catch her in a lie. I was going to dismantle her life, piece by piece. Karen had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. I had survived the poisoning. Now it was my turn to strike back. And when I did, I would make sure she lost everything. She wouldn't just be left with nothing. She would have to watch as I took back everything she had stolen from me. And when it was all over, she would finally understand that she hadn't just betrayed me, she had destroyed her own life. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. The rage that pulsed through me wasn't about to make me act on impulse. No, I needed proof. Cold, hard evidence. I wasn't going to expose her until I had everything lined up, until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, Karen was all smiles. The kind of smile that seemed too wide, too fake, like she was trying too hard to act like nothing happened. She made breakfast just like any other day. I sat at the table pretending everything was fine, but inside I was seething. My mind was already working, already planning the next steps. As she set down a plate in front of me, I could feel her eyes on me. She was watching me, waiting for something, maybe guilt, maybe suspicion, but I gave her nothing. I couldn't let her know. Not yet. I had to be careful. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't say anything to her about the poison, and she didn't ask about the soup. It was like we were both playing a game, she pretending everything was normal, and me waiting for the right moment to strike. But I wasn't just waiting, I was digging. The first place I started was our finances. I had always trusted Karen with the bills, the savings, the budget. I never thought to question her until now. I took a few hours one afternoon when she was out running errands and went through our joint accounts. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew it would be there. That feeling of unease, that instinct that told me Karen wasn't the person I thought she was. It hadn't been wrong. The first thing I found was the life insurance policy. I'd known it existed, but now, seeing the cold numbers on the page, it hit differently. The policy wasn't just a little extra security like she'd led me to believe. No, it was a massive policy, worth millions. And the beneficiary, Karen Harris, my wife. I stared at the document, my heart pounding in my chest. I had been living under the same roof as a woman who had signed papers to collect millions upon my death. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't just a policy for peace of mind. This was a well thought out plan. But that wasn't all. As I kept going through our financial statements, more things started to click. Large transfers, more than I remembered. Withdrawals from our account, always just under the radar, never enough to be noticed, but enough to add up. And then there were the receipts. Receipts that weren't for anything I recognized. I pulled them out one by one, the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. A receipt for an expensive dinner. The date lined up with a weekend when Karen had claimed to be away on a business trip. Another receipt for a luxury hotel stay in a city I didn't know she'd even visited. My stomach churned. But the real gut punch came when I discovered the name on a few of the receipts. His name, Victor Marsh, the businessman she'd been seeing for months. The one who had been more than just a passing flirtation. This wasn't just an affair. This was the man she was planning to run off with. I couldn't breathe. I needed air. My hands were shaking as I stood up and walked outside. The cold January air hit me like a slap, but it didn't bring me any clarity. All it did was deepen the storm brewing inside me. I wasn't just the victim of an affair anymore. I was the target. This wasn't just about her sleeping around. She was planning to destroy my life. She was planning to take everything from me. My money, my security, my life. And she'd been working with him all along. I needed to know more. I needed to connect the dots, to get more evidence, and that meant I had to dig deeper. For the next week, I took my time. I started looking into Victor Marsh, trying to figure out who he was, what he did. What I found shocked me. He was a wealthy businessman, sure, but he had connections. Dangerous connections. His company was linked to a few shady deals, and he had a history of lawsuits, fraud, embezzlement, you name it. I started to see the whole picture. Karen wasn't just trying to kill me for the life insurance. She was in love with him, and he had money more than I could ever give her. She thought she could kill me and ride off into the sunset with him, living a life of luxury. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just some naive fool she could push aside. I'd survived more than she could ever imagine. and I wasn't going to let her tear my life apart without a fight. But I had to play it smart. I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. I had to be methodical. I started keeping a journal, notes on everything. Every phone call I overheard, every email I intercepted, every lie she told, everything. But even as I gathered evidence, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening. My marriage had been a lie. My life had been a lie. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing my identity. Everything I thought I knew was shattered. I was no longer the man Karen had married. I wasn't the same person, and she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't going to confront Karen, not yet. No, I wasn't foolish enough to tip my hand. Not when I was this close to understanding the full extent of her betrayal. Revenge wasn't about emotional outbursts or rash decisions. It was about precision, and I was nothing if not precise. It took a few more days for the shock to settle, for the adrenaline to wear off, but even as the rage simmered beneath my skin, I kept my cool. I needed to plan, to set everything in motion, and to do that I needed help. I reached out to Jake Collins, an old army buddy who had become a private investigator after we both retired. Jake was the kind of guy you could count on. No questions asked. He knew how to find things, dig deep into people's lives, and uncover the stuff they'd rather keep hidden. I hadn't told him everything. Hell, I wasn't even sure how much I could tell him. But I knew one thing: if anyone could help me gather the information I needed, it was Jake. We met at a bar on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where no one would overhear us. I slid into the booth, trying to act like nothing was wrong. But Jake could see it in my eyes the moment I walked in. He knew something was off. And when I told him what had happened about the poisoning, the affair, the life insurance policy, he didn't flinch. Jesus, Oakley. I always knew Karen was a piece of work, but this... Jake shook his head. You want me to get on it? I nodded. I need to know everything. Every phone call, every email, every transfer. I want to know what she's Sip's been up to, who she's Sip's been talking to. Jake didn't have to waste any time. Consider it done. Let's get started on her phone records, bank accounts, whatever I can find. He leaned back in the booth, looking me in the eye. But you know this is dangerous, right? What you Sept are doing here. If she finds out, she won dent. I cut him off. She still never know. I still be careful. I just need the truth. Jake gave a slight nod. He knew better than anyone the kind of careful planning it took to pull something like this off. I left the bar feeling a little lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt like I was in control again. But I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not now. The next few weeks passed in a blur of surveillance, covert conversations, and long nights spent poring over the evidence. Jake was good, better than I could have hoped. He sent me everything I needed. Karen's bank transactions, her communication with Victor Marsh, the lies she'd been feeding me for months. I had to admit, I was impressed. She had been careful, too careful, but she'd made one mistake: she underestimated me. I kept up the act at home, playing the dutiful husband. I went through the motions, dinner, small talk, pretending everything was fine. But behind the facade, I was building something. A plan. Every day I checked the progress, feeling the walls close in on her. I was gathering the pieces, getting closer to the truth. The affair was exactly what I thought it was. A way for Karen to line her pockets, to ensure her future with Victor. But the poison, that was a different story. She hadn't just been planning to replace me with a lover. She had been planning my death. I wasn't about to let her get away with it, not when she thought she was so clever. I'd watched enough people slip up in my life to know that everyone made mistakes. And Karen? She was no different. One night I sat down at my kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me, a stack of receipts and records laid out beside it. The documents were all there. Proof of Karen's financial manipulations, proof of the affair, proof that she had been orchestrating a murder. I started going through the emails one last time, each one more damning than the last. In one of the exchanges, Karen had mentioned the life insurance policy to Victor, referred to it as the final step. That was all I needed, that single line. It proved that the poisoning wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was part of a carefully calculated plan. The worst part? She thought she could get away with it. She thought she had me right where she wanted me. But that was before she realized who she was dealing with. I had everything now, everything I needed: the life insurance policy, the affair, the poison, and Karen's own words written in black and white. I had the truth in my hands, and it was time to make my next move. But I couldn't get complacent. The plan had to be executed perfectly. One wrong move, one slip up, and it would all fall apart. I knew what I had to do, and this time I wasn't just playing defense. I was going on the offense. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to let Karen think she was winning, but the truth was she had already lost. Karen had no idea what kind of game she was playing. Every morning she'd look me in the eye, acting like everything was fine, but I could see the cracks. Her carefully constructed mask was beginning to slip. The tension between us was unbearable. But I kept it together just like I always had. On the outside I was the same, but inside every day felt like I was stepping closer to something much bigger. She had no idea I was playing a game of survival. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was making sure she'd never see it coming. It had been weeks since I'd started digging, weeks since I'd made contact with Jake and began gathering the pieces. I wasn't in a rush. I had all the time in the world. I knew exactly how to make her crack. I started with Victor. I wasn't going to confront him yet, but I had to plant the seed of doubt. If there was one thing I'd learned from my time in the military, it was that people's egos were their biggest weaknesses. And Victor, his ego was massive. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to someone standing up to him. I started subtly manipulating the situation. Karen had told me that Victor was worried about their future together, about how things might look if she left me. I knew he wasn't the type to care about the emotional fallout of an affair, but what he did care about was money. I started feeding him little lies, things that made him second guess his own decisions. It wasn't much, just enough to plant the seed of paranoia. I don't know, Victor. You should be careful. People are talking, I'd tell him. Karen's getting more reckless. You don't want her to drag you down with her. It wasn't long before the cracks in their relationship started to show. He became more distant, more defensive. I could see the shifts in Karen's behavior. She was starting to unravel. She could feel the pressure mounting, and she didn't know where it was coming from. She didn't know that the walls were closing in on her. I played my part, keeping up the charade at home. I pretended everything was fine, laughing at her jokes, sharing a drink after dinner, making small talk like nothing had changed. But inside, I was a different person. I was colder than I had ever been. But it wasn't just Victor I was dealing with. It was Karen, too. And as much as I had to keep her in the dark, I also had to keep her close. She was beginning to get anxious. She could feel something shifting. She'd started coming home late, making excuses. She was always busy, but the truth was, she was slipping. I could feel it in the air. One night after a long day, I decided to push things a little further. I walked into the living room as Karen was talking on the phone. She hadn't noticed me yet, so I stood just inside the doorway, listening. I didn't know who she was talking to, but her voice had a tension in it I hadn't heard before. She was talking in hushed tones, whispering. I stepped closer, trying to catch every word. I told you, we just need a little more time, she was saying. Her voice shaking. Oakley sips still oblivious. He has no idea. We sipped so close. Just a little longer. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. The pieces were falling into place. She was talking to Victor. She was telling him how close she was to finishing her plan, how close she was to walking away with everything. I could feel the blood rush to my head, the anger swelling inside me. But I didn't react, not yet. I couldn't. I had to stay calm, I had to stay in control. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, my pulse racing. But I didn't let her know I'd heard. I couldn't afford to slip up. Not now. The game was far from over. Later that night, Karen came into the kitchen, acting like everything was normal. But I could see the cracks. The way she fidgeted with her hair, the way her eyes darted away when I looked at her. She knew. She knew something was wrong. And that made her dangerous. But it also made her vulnerable. And that was exactly where I wanted her. The next morning I went over everything I had. Her financials, the emails, the phone records, the notes Jake had sent me. I had her, everything she'd been hiding was now exposed, and the more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. But I wasn't about to let my emotions cloud my judgment. I had a plan, and I was going to execute it with military precision. Every move had to be calculated. Every word, every gesture had to be deliberate. But even as I prepared to make my next move, I couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness inside. This wasn't what I had envisioned when I first married Karen. I had believed in her. I had trusted her. But all of that had been a lie. I wasn't just avenging my life. I was reclaiming it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about justice. It was about control. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Not my life, not my dignity. I was going to take it all back. She thought she could control me. She thought she had the power. But she didn't know what I was capable of. She had no idea how much I changed. By now, I had every piece of the puzzle. Every receipt, every bank transaction, every email, every phone call. I could see it all clearly now. Karen's affair, her manipulation, the poison, the insurance policy. It was all there, laid out in front of me like a map of her betrayal. And it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. But she was getting desperate. I could see it in her eyes. The little cracks in her facade were widening, and I knew she could feel the pressure building. I wasn't just waiting for her to slip up. I was waiting for her to realize that she had already lost. For weeks, I'd been playing the part of the oblivious husband. Every day, I wore the mask. I smiled, I laughed, I made small talk, but inside, I was calculating every move, every word, and Karen, she had no idea. It wasn't just the financials I was digging into anymore. It wasn't just the emails and phone records. I started tracking her movements. Jake had been doing his part, tapping into her digital life, monitoring her communications with Victor. I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. I watched her more closely now. Her late nights, the excuses, the time she spent on her phone. Away from me, I could feel the paranoia creeping in, both mine and hers. But I couldn't afford to let it show, not yet. One night, as I was going through the records again, something caught my eye. A transfer. A large sum of money, more than I'd ever seen before, had been moved from our joint account to an offshore account in Karen's name. It was one of the last pieces of the puzzle I needed. The money wasn't for anything legitimate. It was for her escape plan. Her future with Victor. I had the evidence. Now I needed to make sure she knew that I had it. The next day, I made my move. It was a small thing, but it would set the stage for everything else. I had Tessa, my ex-military lawyer, run a background check on Victor's business interests. She was good, better than good. She had contacts everywhere, and she was already digging into the man's shady dealings. I needed to know what kind of dirt I could use against him. I was no longer just dealing with Karen. I was going after both of them, and I wasn't going to stop until they were exposed for everything they'd done. As I sat at the kitchen table that night, reviewing everything once more, Karen walked into the room. She was trying to act normal, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes. She knew something was off. She didn't know how much I knew, but she could feel it. "Why are you always on that damn computer?" she asked, her voice sharp. She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in it. "Is there something you started not telling me?" I looked up from the screen and smiled. "Just going over some old stuff, taxes, financials, that kind of thing." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face. It wasn't the first time I'd caught her trying to read me. She was looking for a hint, a clue, but she wouldn't find one. "You sure?" she pressed. "You've been acting a little strange lately. Are you hiding something?" I raised an eyebrow. "Hiding something? What would I be hiding from you?" She stood there for a moment, her arms crossed, looking me over as if she were trying to figure me out. But I wasn't about to let her. I wasn't about to let her know that I was 2 steps ahead. "Except I'm fine, Karen." "Really? Just a little tired, I guess," I said, leaning back in my chair, trying to seem nonchalant. "Don't Sephin worry about it." She stared at me for a few more seconds before shaking her head and walking away, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She was rattled. I could see it in the way she walked, in the way she kept glancing back at me. It was working. The walls were closing in on her. The next morning, I had everything ready. Jake had come through with the final piece I needed, an email between Karen and Victor confirming the offshore account and discussing their plans to leave. It was a gold mine, the kind of evidence that would ruin them both. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But I wasn't just going to hand it to them. No, I was going to let them sweat. I knew Karen would start making mistakes now. She'd try to cover her tracks, but the more she did, the more I'd tighten the noose. I could feel the shift. The more she tried to assert control, the more desperate she became. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make sure she felt the weight of what she'd done. I had the power now. I was in control, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I had everything in place. The evidence was bulletproof. The offshore account, the emails, the life insurance policy, the phone records, Karen's affair, Victor's involvement. Every lie she had told was carefully documented, filed away, ready to be unleashed at the perfect moment. But there was still one thing I had to do before I made my final move. I had to be sure. I'd spent months gathering information, watching her, waiting for the moment when she would crack. I had to see how far I could push her without revealing my hand. Every small misstep, every sign of doubt or anxiety, those were the moments I was looking for. The days felt like they were stretching out longer and longer, each one spent in this quiet, suffocating tension. Karen had no idea how close she was to losing everything. I could feel the walls closing in on her, but I had to wait for her to make the first real mistake. It was January again. The cold had settled in, a thick layer of frost covering the windows, and yet inside there was a heat building between us. Not the heat of passion or love, but the kind of heat that comes from knowing your life is about to be destroyed. And she knew it. I could see it in the way she started to avoid me. The longer I played my role as the oblivious husband, the more distant she became. The conversations started to feel more like interrogations, with her looking for any sign that I knew what she had been up to, but I never gave her anything. I played the part perfectly. We hadn't spoken about the poisoning. Not directly. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't even brought it up. And I wasn't going to. I didn't need to. I had the proof. And when the time was right, I would destroy her. I reached out to Tessa again. My lawyer, the woman who had been helping me quietly from the shadows. She was sharp, too sharp, and she understood the stakes. We met in a nondescript coffee shop one morning. "I've got everything ready," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "The court filings, the affidavits, the documents to show the full extent of her fraud." I opened the folder, flipping through the papers. Everything was there, every piece of evidence, all neatly organized. It felt like the calm before the storm. But I wasn't ready to hit send yet, not until everything was in position. I needed the final nail in the coffin. I leaned back in the chair, taking a moment to appreciate how far I had come. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back control. She had thought she could erase me. She had thought she could replace me with Victor, run off with his money, and live her perfect life. But she had underestimated me. She had underestimated my patience. "How much longer?" I asked, the question hanging in the air between us. Tessa met my gaze. "Not much longer. Once we have Victor Sip's testimony, we sell move. You sell have her dead to rights. There's Sep's no way she can escape this." "Good," I said, pushing the folder back toward her. "Let Subs keep her in the dark for now. I want her to think she's Subs winning. I want her to get comfortable." Tessa gave me a nod of approval. "You step her playing this smart. I like it. You step her one step away from taking everything." I didn't feel good about what I was doing, but I knew it was necessary. The emotional toll of everything had started to wear on me, but I couldn't stop now, not when I was so close. Karen had taken everything from me. My trust, my peace, my sense of security. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not when I had the power to destroy her. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Every moment felt like it could be the moment when I made the final call, but I kept my cool. I couldn't afford to make a mistake now. I kept watching Karen, waiting for her to slip. Every night, I stayed up late, reviewing the evidence again and again. I wanted to be absolutely sure. I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to make sure she never saw it coming. And then, one evening, I found it. A text message. It was from Victor. He'd accidentally sent it to me instead of Karen. It wasn't just any message, it was a confession. He'd admitted everything. The affair, the life insurance, the plan to kill me. The exact words were there, clear as day. Once Oakley Sepp's gone, we as all have everything we need. His life insurance, the house, we can finally be free. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The one thing I needed to ensure her complete downfall. I sat there staring at the message, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I had everything. Every single piece of evidence I needed to take her down. The life insurance, the poisoning, the affair, Victor's confession. It was all in my hands. But I couldn't rush this. I had to wait. The storm was coming, but it wasn't quite time to unleash it. Not yet. I closed the laptop, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to feel like victory, but it was the only way. I wasn't going to let Karen destroy me, not without making her pay. The day had finally arrived. The courtroom was packed. I could feel the eyes on me, eyes that didn't know the full story. I could hear the low hum of whispers, the shuffle of feet, the murmurs of disbelief as I walked to my seat. I wasn't just walking into a courtroom, I was walking into a battlefield. Karen sat across the room, her face a perfect mask of confidence, but I could see it in her eyes. Her nerves were starting to show. She was trying to act like she had control, like she was the one who had the upper hand. But I knew the truth. She had no idea what was coming. Tessa sat beside me, her presence steady and calming. She didn't need to say a word. I could feel the quiet strength she exuded. She knew what this meant. She knew how much was at stake. But most of all, she knew we were about to expose Karen for the fraud she was. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind us, and the judge took his seat, his gavel coming down with a sharp, decisive bang. I had prepared for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, I couldn't shake the tightness in my chest. It wasn't fear. No, it was something different. Something colder. This was about justice. Tessa stood up first, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Oakley Harris, has come to this courtroom today not to seek vengeance, but to seek justice. What my client has endured at the hands of his wife, Karen Harris, is nothing short of a betrayal that has destroyed his life, his trust, and his very sense of self. I didn't take my eyes off Karen as Tessa spoke. She didn't even glance at me. She couldn't. I could see the anxiety flickering behind her eyes, and it made every minute of this worth it. Tessa continued, laying out the evidence one piece at a time, her voice steady and sure. The defendant, Karen Harris, not only had an affair with Victor Marsh, but she also schemed to murder her husband for financial gain. We have bank records, we have emails, we have phone records, and we have the undeniable proof of her attempt to poison Mr. Harris. All of it points to one thing: Karen Harris intended to end her husband's life for money. I could hear the gasps in the courtroom as Tessa's words landed. Karen's face flushed, and she finally looked at me, her expression full of panic. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected me to fight back. But here we were, and she was about to be exposed for everything she had done. I watched as Karen's lawyer stood up to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. There was no need for objections today. The truth was on the table, and there was no getting around it. Tessa didn't stop. She was relentless, pulling out document after document, laying them out in front of the judge. She was methodical, precise, everything I had trained myself to be during the months of planning. And then, as if the final blow hadn't been enough, Tessa revealed the text message. The one where Victor had admitted to the entire scheme. We have here a message sent from Victor Marsh to Karen Harris. It reads, "Once Oakley's gone, we'll have everything we need. His life insurance, the house, we can finally be free." I watched Karen's face drain of color as the text appeared on the screen behind her. The room fell silent. Even her lawyer didn't know what to say. Your Honor, Tessa continued, her voice unwavering, we have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Karen Harris and Victor Marsh conspired to murder my client for personal gain. The emotional, financial, and physical toll this has had on Mr. Harris is immeasurable. I could feel the weight of every word Tessa spoke settling in the room, settling on Karen. She tried to hold herself together, but it was clear she was losing control. The lies, the manipulation, the poisoning attempt, it was all laid bare in front of everyone. Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, the sound of my shoes clicking against the polished floor echoing through the room. I didn't need to say much. The evidence spoke for itself, but I wasn't here just for the victory. I was here for closure. I spent the last 2 years of my life living with this. I began, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything I had been through. I trusted Karen with everything. My heart, my money, my future. And she betrayed me. She didn't just betray me. She tried to take my life. I paused, letting the words sink in. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, but I didn't look away from Karen. I needed her to hear every word. What Karen did to me isn't just an act of betrayal. It's a crime. She didn't just steal from me. She tried to kill me. And for what? Money? Power? I don't know. But I know this, I'm not the same man who walked into that house 2 years ago. I'm stronger. I'm wiser. And today I will get my justice. I could see her squirm in her seat, her face twisting in anger, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't the man she thought she could manipulate. I wasn't the man she tried to kill. The judge called for a brief recess, and as I stood up, I locked eyes with Karen one last time. There was no triumph in my gaze, no satisfaction. There was only the calm of knowing that justice was finally coming for her. When the recess was over, the judge came back into the room, his expression stern. He took his time reviewing the evidence, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind what was coming. The verdict was swift. Karen Harris, you are hereby found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and multiple counts of financial manipulation. The court will reconvene for sentencing at a later date. You are remanded into custody until then. The room erupted in whispers, gasps, and murmurs, but I didn't hear any of it. I didn't feel any sense of relief, only a quiet satisfaction. I had taken back what was mine. I had fought for my life, and I had won. As Karen was escorted out of the courtroom, her eyes met mine one last time. She looked broken, and for the first time in years I realized something that I hadn't wanted to face before. I didn't feel sorry for her. I had been the one who lost everything, but now she was the one who had nothing left. The days after the trial felt like a blur. The courtroom had been the final battlefield, but the victory wasn't as sweet as I'd expected. The relief was there, yes, but it wasn't the rush of triumph I thought it would be. Instead, it was a strange emptiness, as if everything I had built my life around had been dismantled, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. Karen's arrest was just the beginning. The fallout was still unfolding, like a slow burn that would consume everything in its path. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but seeing her escorted away in handcuffs, her face pale and defeated, didn't fill me with the sense of justice I had imagined. I had won, yes, but there was a bitter taste to it, a hollow satisfaction that didn't quite fill the void. The first few weeks after the trial were quiet. Too quiet. I spent my days in the house we had shared, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The walls were full of memories that no longer felt like mine. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, but something was missing, something that had been lost long before the courtroom showdown. Karen's life fell apart quickly. The affair with Victor, the money, the lies, they all came crashing down around her. Her business partners abandoned her one by one, disgusted by her actions. The company she had worked so hard to build was left in ruins. Her connections evaporated like smoke, and there was no one left to protect her. The bank accounts were frozen, her assets seized. The offshore accounts were traced and locked up by the authorities. And as her world crumbled, she had nothing left to cling to. Not her lover, not her money, and certainly not her reputation. I had hoped she'd understand the weight of what she had done, that she'd see the cost of her betrayal. But in the end, it wasn't about her understanding. It was about her facing the consequences of her actions, no matter how much she tried to escape them. I heard from Tessa shortly after the trial. She told me the news: Karen had been indicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. She was facing years behind bars. The sentence hadn't been handed down yet, but the jury's verdict was final. Karen had no chance of getting out of this. It wasn't just her freedom that had been taken away. The life she had tried to build on my ruin had been shattered. Victor Marsh was no longer in the picture either. The authorities had dug into his background, exposing his shady dealings and ties to illegal activities. His wealth had been stripped away as quickly as it had been accumulated, and he was left with nothing but the consequences of his own greed. I didn't feel vindicated by any of it. I wasn't dancing on her grave. I wasn't celebrating the fall of the woman who had tried to destroy me. It was just over. For a while, I thought about reaching out to her, if only to hear her say something, anything that would make sense of the chaos she had brought into my life. But I knew better. She had nothing left to say that would make any of this easier to swallow. The hardest part wasn't seeing her in chains, wasn't hearing the cold click of her prison cell door closing behind her. No, the hardest part was realizing that after all of this I was left with the same empty house, the same life that had been tainted by her lies and deceit. I was free, but I didn't know what to do with that freedom. I didn't want to be a victim anymore, but I didn't know how to stop being one. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I started working on myself, trying to rebuild the pieces of a life I had once taken for granted. Slowly, I began to find my footing again. I started running, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't about escaping the past. It was about finding clarity in the present. I spent more time with Jake, my old army buddy. We went out for drinks, laughed, talked about old times. The more I did this, the more I realized that I wasn't the same person I had been before Karen, and that was okay. I had changed, but I wasn't broken. Then, one evening, something happened. I received a letter. At first, I didn't recognize the handwriting. It was from Karen. My heart sank as I opened it. It was a brief note, just a few sentences, but it was enough to send a chill through me. I'm sorry for everything I did. I can set ask for your forgiveness. I don't set deserve it, but I hope one day you can find peace. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't set know what happened to me. The words were hollow, empty, but I couldn't stop staring at the paper. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to never look at it again, but another part of me, the part that had once loved her, couldn't let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. That maybe, deep down, she understood the gravity of her actions. But that wasn't for me to decide. I had already moved on. In the end, I didn't respond. I burned the letter, watching the flames consume the paper. It felt like the last tie that had bound me to her was finally severed. I was done. The years would pass. The wounds would fade. And I would rebuild, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I would never forget what Karen had done to me, but I wouldn't let it define me either. I had taken back my life. I had found my peace in the aftermath, and that was all I needed. The dust had settled. It had been 6 months since the trial, 6 months since Karen's conviction, and yet the echoes of everything that happened still lingered. The quietness in the house was a constant reminder of the life I once had, the life she had tried to destroy. But now, that life had been rebuilt, piece by piece, like a puzzle I was slowly putting together. The hardest part was always the quiet. The silence. When the case had finally been closed and the world had moved on, I found myself standing still, trapped in the space where everything had fallen apart. The house felt too big, too empty. No matter how much I tried to fill the void with work, with friends, with distractions, nothing could drown out the past. Karen was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The charges: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a slew of financial crimes had all been piled up against her, leaving her with little room to maneuver. She had no defense, no way out. She had betrayed me, and in doing so she had destroyed herself. Victor Marsh's downfall came soon after hers. Once the authorities had linked him to Karen's scheme, they uncovered a wealth of illegal dealings. His business empire crumbled, and his assets were frozen. No amount of money or connections could save him now. He, too, was facing years in prison for his role in the plot against me. But even with all of this, it didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel the triumphant sense of victory that I had imagined. Instead, I felt the weight of the past settle over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore, it was everything that had come after it. The loss of trust, the years of my life that I'd given to someone who had been planning to destroy me all along. That was harder to face than the trial, harder to understand than the evidence I had stacked against her. I spent my days going through the motions, pretending to move on, pretending to be whole. But the truth was, there were still scars. The emotional toll Karen had taken on me ran deeper than I had anticipated. It wasn't just her betrayal of our marriage, it was the slow, methodical way she had planned everything out, the poison. The affair, the manipulation of my trust. That wasn't something you just get over. Jake had become a regular part of my life again. We went out for drinks, talked about the old days, the things we never thought we'd talk about again. I had tried to tell him about everything that had happened, but the words never quite came out right. It wasn't something I wanted to share. It wasn't something I could explain. It was something I needed to work through on my own. Then one day, something changed. I got a call from Tessa. The tone in her voice was different from usual, more urgent. "Oakley, we need to talk," she said, her voice laced with concern. I knew something was coming. I could feel it. When we met, she didn't waste any time. Karen Sip's appeal has been filed. Sip's trying to get her sentence reduced. I stared at her, stunned. Appeal? Sip's already been convicted. She tried to kill me. I know, Tessa said. But the law is the law, Oakley. And Karen Sit's got money. She sits trying to get her sentence reduced, maybe even get released early. The appeal is happening. It sits serious. We need to prepare. I didn't know what to say. The idea of Karen trying to get out of prison, trying to undo everything she had done, it made my stomach churn. But it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me, and it was about my future. As if I'm not going to let her win, I said, my voice cold. I wasn't set to let her manipulate her way out of this. Tessa nodded. We start going to fight it. We starve got the evidence. We starve make sure she stays exactly where she belongs. I didn't need any convincing. I wasn't about to let Karen worm her way out of this. She had taken everything from me once, but she wasn't going to take my peace. Not again. The appeal dragged on for months. Each hearing, each bit of paperwork that came through felt like another reminder of what I had endured. I kept my distance from the legal proceedings, letting Tessa handle the details. But I kept track. I kept my eyes on everything. I wasn't going to let up. Then the decision came. Karen's appeal was denied. The judge ruled that the severity of her crimes, the calculated nature of her betrayal, left no room for leniency. The original sentence stood. She would spend 20 years behind bars and nothing would change that. I didn't feel any relief when I heard the news. There was no joy in it, just a quiet, steady sense of finality. The fight had been long. The scars were still there, but I had won, and more importantly, justice had been served. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something that resembled peace. It wasn't victory, it wasn't joy, but it was peace. I had reclaimed my life. I had taken back everything she had tried to take from me. And now I could finally move forward. It's strange how life works. You think you've got it all figured out, you think you know who you are and what you want, but the truth is, we're all just walking through life, trying to make sense of the pieces we're given. After everything I went through, I can say with certainty that the person who walked out of that courtroom wasn't the same man who walked in. I don't know if I'll ever truly get over what Karen did to me. Maybe no one ever does. You don't just forget a betrayal like that. But time has a funny way of dulling the sharp edges of pain, of making things feel less heavy. It doesn't go away, but it becomes something you can carry with you, something you learn to live with. I've thought a lot about what justice really is. When I first started this journey, it was all about making her pay, about punishing her for what she'd done. I wanted to watch her lose everything. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she'd lost. But in the end, that's not what happened. I didn't get any satisfaction from seeing her behind bars. I didn't feel triumphant when the final verdict came down. No, the only thing that felt real was when I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had survived. A man who had taken back control of his life, piece by piece. That was the victory. It wasn't about Karen. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me reclaiming the pieces of myself I'd given away to someone who didn't deserve them. I've spent the past few months rebuilding. Not just my house, not just my life, but me. I've taken the time to reflect, to see how far I've come, and to understand the person I've become through all of this. It's been a process. It's been painful, but in a way it's been freeing. I went back to the gym, something I hadn't done in years. The strength training wasn't just about physical power, it was about regaining control over my body, over my mind. I started running, pushing myself to go further each day. The more I ran, the more I realized how much I had been holding myself back. The weight of betrayal had anchored me, kept me from moving forward. But each step forward, each mile, was a step closer to leaving that weight behind. I've also reconnected with the people I pushed away during the darkest days. Friends I'd neglected, family I'd isolated myself from. They never judged me, they never asked for explanations. They were just there, and that made all the difference. The more I opened up, the more I realized that I wasn't alone in this. Everyone has their own battles. Everyone carries scars, but none of us have to face it alone. I started seeing a therapist too. It wasn't easy at first. I didn't want to open up about everything that had happened, about the toll it had taken on me, but I'm glad I did. It wasn't just about talking through the past. It was about understanding how to move forward, about learning to forgive myself for what I couldn't control, about finding peace in the things I could. The hardest thing to admit, I still think about Karen sometimes. I still wonder what would have happened if she had chosen differently. What if she hadn't made those choices? What if she hadn't crossed the line? What if she hadn't poisoned me? But those thoughts don't haunt me like they used to. They don't define me anymore. I've learned to let go, and that's the real victory, letting go. I've also thought about forgiveness, though I'm not sure I'll ever fully be able to forgive her. Maybe one day I'll get to that point. But for now, I know that forgiveness is for me. It's not for her. It's for me to let go of the anger, the resentment, the need for vengeance, and that's something I'm still working on. It's a journey, not a destination. But for now, I'm at peace. I've built a new life for myself, one that isn't defined by betrayal or revenge. It's defined by the choices I make every day, by the strength I've found within myself. I'm no longer the victim. I'm no longer the man who was betrayed. I'm the man who took his life back. I've learned that justice isn't always about the punishment. Sometimes it's about finding the strength to walk away, to rebuild, and to move forward with your head held high. It's about finding peace within yourself, not in the downfall of others. I don't need to see Karen again. I don't need to know what happens to her. She's already lost everything, and there's no satisfaction in that. What I need is to keep moving forward, to keep living. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't winning in court. It wasn't taking back what was mine. It wasn't destroying her life in return. The greatest victory was walking away, letting go. And in that I found my peace. A year had passed since the trial, since Karen's conviction, and yet in some ways it felt like the whole ordeal had only happened yesterday. Time had done its part to heal the wounds, but they were still there, scars that never fully faded. I'd moved on, yes, but the past lingered like a shadow, never too far behind. Life had found a rhythm again. My work, my daily routines, the long runs I'd gotten used to, it all became part of the new normal. But even in the quiet moments, I couldn't help but remember the man I had been before everything had fallen apart. The person who trusted without question. The man who loved without doubt. That man was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the hard way what betrayal really meant. I hadn't heard from Karen since the trial. There were no letters, no calls, no attempts to reach out. That was what I had expected, I suppose. Her pride, her guilt, her shame. After everything that had happened, it was no surprise that she would keep her distance. But there were still moments when I wondered if she ever thought about me, about what she had done. Did she ever regret it? Did she ever wish she had chosen differently? But I wasn't looking for answers. I didn't need them. I had my closure. The justice I had sought had been served. Karen was in prison where she belonged, and nothing could change that. She had no more hold over my life, and that in itself was a form of peace. I never went back to visit the house where we had lived together. I couldn't. The memories were too heavy, too painful. So I sold it. I found a small place in the city, a place that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it was mine. I made it my own, filled it with things that mattered to me. A new life, a new chapter. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Eric, my brother. I hadn't spoken to him much in the past year, not out of any particular reason, but because I had been focused on healing, on rebuilding. But now his voice was on the other end of the line, steady but with an edge of urgency. I saw something today, he said, his tone sharp. I don't set know if it's something you want to hear, but I think you should know. I listened, the knot in my stomach tightening as Eric continued. It's Senna's about Karen. Senna's been trying to get out early. Senna's filing for parole. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had thought for a moment that it was all over, that Karen's place was secure, that she had been forgotten in the prison system. But here she was again, clawing her way back into my life, trying to regain control in whatever way she could. The thought of her even trying to get out early was a slap to the face. After everything, she still hadn't learned. She still thought she could escape, that she could get a second chance. Are you sure? I asked, my voice tight. Eric paused before responding. Yeah, it's set's public. Her parole hearing is in a couple of months. They set filed all the paperwork. Sep's been trying to get early release, and it looks like they might give it a chance. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me. The last thing I wanted was to hear about her getting out, about her somehow slipping through the cracks and coming back into the world. But there was something else too, a coldness, a reminder that this wasn't over. Not for her, not for me. I'm not going to let her get away with it, I said firmly, the decision already forming in my mind. Eric was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke softly. You don't have to do anything. You Sep already done more than enough, Oakley. She Sep's where she belongs. I know, I said, exhaling sharply. But this is something I can let go. I Sep already lost so much. I can just walk away from this now. Eric didn't argue. He understood. He knew what I had been through, and he knew that letting go was never going to be easy for me. I called Tessa the next day. My mind made up. I need to stop her. I can let her get out. She was quiet for a moment before responding. You've been through so much already. You don't owe her anything. I know, I said. But I need to see this through. I need to make sure she doesn't have a chance to hurt anyone else, to hurt me again. Tessa didn't push me. She agreed to help, to look into Karen's parole hearing, to gather the information I needed. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about ensuring justice was served, making sure the system didn't fail me after everything that had happened. Over the next few weeks, we dug into the details of Karen's parole application. We reached out to the right people, gathered testimonies, and made sure the parole board knew exactly who Karen was, what she had done, and how dangerous she still was. The process was exhausting, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her get a free pass. The day of the hearing came, and I sat in a quiet room, my hands clenched tight, waiting for the news. When it came, it wasn't what I had hoped for. Karen had been denied early release. Her actions were deemed too severe, and the board decided that she still posed a threat to society. I didn't feel anything when I heard the verdict. Not relief, not joy, just quiet acknowledgement that justice had been done. I had done my part. I had fought for what was right, and in the end, that was all that mattered. A few months passed since Karen's parole hearing, and with each passing day, I found myself more and more at peace. The battle had been long, exhausting, but I had fought for what was right, for the justice that had eluded me for so long. Now, as the world moved on, I found myself in a place I hadn't thought I'd ever reach. I had rebuilt my life. I was stronger. I was free. But as the days grew quieter, I began to wonder if there was more to this, more to me reclaiming my life than simply surviving the storm. It's strange how, when you've been through something like I have, you start questioning everything, even the things you thought you were certain about. I thought about the letter Karen had sent me, the one she had written right after the trial. In a way, I had thought it would be the final chapter, the last word in this story. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, and it wasn't a grand confession. It was just a few lines. A short message, but it had stuck with me. In the quiet moments when I'd be lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling. The truth was, I didn't know if she had meant what she said in that letter. Was it genuine remorse? Or was it just another act? Was she trying to manipulate me, even from prison? Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had seen her for what she was, and I had let go. I thought I had reached my final moment of peace, that the past was behind me, but life, as it often does, had other plans. It was on an ordinary Tuesday when I received another letter. This one wasn't from Karen. This one was from the prison where she was serving her time. The envelope was thick. The paper inside was formal, official. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, my stomach twisting in that familiar way, the way it always did when something from the past crept back into my life. The letter was a request from Karen's lawyer. They were appealing her sentence once again, arguing that the conditions of her incarceration were too harsh, that she had been rehabilitated. I couldn't believe it. After everything she'd done, she was trying to get out again. The irony of it hit me like a punch to the gut. She had spent years scheming, trying to destroy me, and now here she was trying to manipulate the system to escape her punishment. I couldn't ignore it. I had to act. I wasn't going to let her do it again. She had already taken so much from me, from my peace, from my trust in people. But I was no longer that man. I wasn't the one who would let her walk free. Not when I had fought so hard to see her face the consequences of her actions. I contacted Tessa immediately. "We need to fight this," I said, my voice tight. "We can let her get away with it." Tessa didn't hesitate. "ISEF got it covered. We file the necessary objections. Present the evidence," she once said. "Get out." It was another fight. Another round in a battle that I thought had already been won. But this time, it wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that justice would be served, that she wouldn't slip through the cracks. I had learned that I couldn't afford to let her win, not even one last time. I spent the next few weeks going through the details of the appeal. It wasn't easy. Every time I read about Karen's requests for early release, every time I saw her name on paper, I felt that old familiar anger stir inside me. But I didn't let it consume me. I focused on the facts. I focused on the justice I had fought for. The day of the hearing came, and I found myself standing in a courtroom again. This time it wasn't for my own fight, it was for the fight to keep Karen where she belonged. Tessa and I presented our case, laying out the evidence that showed she had not only failed to demonstrate true remorse, but had also continued to manipulate the system to her advantage. Karen's lawyer argued that she had been a model inmate, that she had undergone therapy and rehabilitation, but it was all smoke and mirrors. The parole board saw it too. The verdict came swiftly, and when the judge pronounced it, I could feel the weight of the decision. Karen's appeal was denied. Her sentence remained intact. I left the courthouse that day with a sense of finality. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a win that felt sweet. It felt like the last chapter had been written, and all that was left was to turn the page. I didn't think about Karen much after that. The case was closed, her appeal denied, and I went on with my life. The letter from her lawyer became just another piece of the past, one more attempt that failed. It was like the universe had a way of making sure justice remained in place, even when it seemed like everything had fallen apart. In the end, I realized the truth. The greatest irony wasn't in Karen's attempts to manipulate the system. The irony was that in trying to destroy me, she had only destroyed herself, and I had walked away unscathed. The justice I had sought was never in her downfall. It was in my ability to rise above it all and move on with my life. I didn't need to see her again. I didn't need to hear from her again. The greatest victory wasn't in winning or in watching her lose. It was in the quiet peace of knowing that I had finally let go, that I had taken back everything she had stolen from me, and that my life was mine again.